Contending for the Faith. In this regular feature, Dave and Tom respond to questions from listeners and readers of the Berean Call.
I actually had to look up Berean Call. It's in part of the Bible I haven't gotten to yet. Apparently it's a Protestant thing and has to do with committing yourself to searching the scriptures daily. I can see why they'd name their call-in radio show that. Let's do this. Greetings, fellow space travelers. BionicDance here. A call-in radio show. It's like a primitive version of a Google Hangout, isn't it?
Here's this week's question. Dear Dave and Tom, you have made a reference to Pascal's wager, suggesting that it is a better gamble to believe in God and live by his rules.
The narrator is going to go on for about a minute, a slow minute, describing Pascal's wager and the subsequent atheist wager rebuttal. So let me Cliff's Notes this for you. Pascal's wager says it's better to believe in God and avoid hell, or have nothing happen at all, than to not believe in God and risk eternal torture. The atheist wager is, apparently, that it's better to live a good life regardless, and any benevolent God should think that's good enough, belief or no belief. Of course, Pascal's wager has never taken into account that there's more than one God to believe in. It assumes that there's the Christian God and there is atheism, and that's it. Should we believe in every God and hope we've gotten it right?
Seems like they're making up an idea of God. Well, the very least we could say is, in this wager, this is not the biblical God.
He comes so close, but then the ball gets past him and he continues assuming that the biblical God is the only one that needs to be discussed.
People often say, well, if I live a good life. Well, I ask them a simple question. By whose standards?
And this is the problem you always run into. They want a rule book. They want a list of if this, then that directives. They don't want to have to improvise. Maybe there isn't a standard. Maybe there is a very general standard. How about we just try to hurt as few people as possible? How about we do our damnedest to make sure that the folks around us aren't miserable, whether by our action or inaction? So how do we ensure this? We don't need a rule book. What we need is an instruction manual.
You know, I was driving with a Sikh, quite a long journey in a limousine to go to a conference.
Mm-hmm. This would be a Hindu?
Well, it's a sect of Hinduism.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm trying to witness to him, give him the gospel. Well, first of all, he doesn't think he's a sinner. He doesn't need Christ. He's not a sinner. He's lived a good life. And I said, well, you know, the very first commandment is, thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, strength, mind, so forth.
First he asks whose standard, and then when someone tells him their standard, he tells them that they're a sinner by his own standard. And it's like, dude, you're listening, but you're not hearing. A problem I encounter a lot, even from other atheists. You know who you are.
So whose standard are we talking about? Well, if I live a good life, wait a minute. What about, you see, what about your motives? You never lusted. You never were selfish. You know, it only takes one sin to be a sinner. It takes one murder to be a murderer.
And here we run into another problem, the black or white, on or off nature of sin. He's equating lust and selfishness with murder. Killing a guy is the same as thinking humana humana when a hot babe walks by in a bikini. It's that whole committing a sin in your heart nonsense, thought control. What you feel shouldn't matter. It's what you do that counts. So you lusted. Then what? Did you respectfully ask her for a date? Did you wolf whistle at her? Grab her by the pussy? Rape her? Put her in your spank bank and move on? Did you make her life better or worse for your presence in it? Let's suppose you committed the murder or pinched her tuchus, but not both. Do they deserve the same punishment? Eternal torture? Really? Not even our justice system works that way. The worse the crime, the worse the time. You ask whose standard? That's a standard we had to come up with for ourselves. God didn't write our laws.
And it's God who is going to judge you. You're going to have to go by his standards, and he's laid them out. Now, if you want to say, I don't need to accept Christ, you sent Christ to die for my sins, he's God who became a man, and this is what you said was the penalty that had to be paid, And no, I don't think I need to go by that. You're like Adam and Eve back in the garden. Well, God says, don't eat of this fruit. I don't think we can do that.
It's not that I don't need it. I don't believe it. But Pascal's wager, which, if you'll remember, was the original topic, says that I should believe in that crapola as a form of soul insurance, and if it's not real, no big deal, nothing lost. Well, nothing lost except a lot of free time and a lot of harmless fun anyway. Not to mention my sexuality. God doesn't seem to much care for lesbians now, does he? Religion isn't just belief in a God. It comes with that rule book of theirs, which contains more than a few pretty unreasonable rules. If their God isn't real and those rules aren't valid, they're still going to have a profound and unwelcome effect on our lives.
So first of all, you are proving that you are a rebel. You are not willing to accept what God says. And I would say that that is very, very serious.
Mm-hmm.
But again, the subject is belief, and you want me to believe in somebody who's probably nobody. Which means we're kind of stuck in a loop here. You're not going to prove God is real. I have to believe in this probably nobody as a form of hell repellent. But why should I believe what's being said by nobody? I have to believe in order to avoid eternal torture. But why? You see the problem?
The Bible lays it out pretty clearly. Romans chapter 2. Romans chapter 1 says everybody knows God exists.
Well, doesn't that neatly get around the having to prove it problem? You're just adding another step to that loop, or rather adding another ingredient to the believe what God says part.
So I could just ask this person, well, can you tell me that you have always lived up to your conscience? Does your conscience tell you that right now, that what you are saying in rebellion against God, you're not willing to accept his terms? Are you saying that that does not violate your conscience?
That most certainly does not violate my conscience in the least, any more than it would violate your conscience for not following a religion that isn't your own. I have no idea why this is such a blind spot in their thinking, and I'm being charitable by calling it that. It's probably a case of intellectual neglect rather than intellectual inferiority. Right? But regardless, this idea that violating Christian doctrine must wear on a person's conscience when there are so many other moral codes out there in human culture is ignorance at best, hubris at worst.
Dave, it's also interesting that if we could have a person say, all right, there is no God, but you make up a list of rules for yourself, okay, based on what you believe is, has to do with integrity and good morality and so on. Make that list up. I guarantee you, they can't live up to their own list, let alone the standard that God has set.
Right.
So, people aren't perfect. They fuck up once in a while. This is news. You guys are the ones who make out like that's a hell-worthy trespass, whether we're talking a literal or figurative Hades here, rather than just a social faux pas.
This is in the conscience, and you can't really escape that. And if you're going to take your own way, set your own standards, your conscience will tell you. You just don't do that with God.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, there are things that God does in this book which we would never tolerate from a human. There are things humans do which are fully condoned by God, even encouraged, which are against the law today. My conscience tells me to stay as far away from this religion as I possibly can. I only discuss it in self-defense because you jackals have a tendency to chase us. Anyway, for those of you who go check out the original video, as usual, link in the description, you'll note a couple of things. First, this isn't the original video. Someone swiped a tiny portion from the original source and posted it on their own channel. I went digging in the original channel for a brief moment trying to find where this came from, but it stopped being worth it rather quickly. Second, I cut out a fair portion of what I did find. Most of it was clipped for being redundant or irrelevant to the point, little stories and anecdotes and the like. Or they were just rephrasing something they'd already said. In the name of integrity, I did my best to keep their message intact regardless. I'll let you judge how well I did that job. Until next time, fellow space travelers, this is BionicDance saying don't run on automatic. Instead, please think.
You know, Dewey, we wouldn't have to do this if I had more Patreon patrons. Just saying.
Not rating and subscribing has been found to cause obesity, acne, and male pattern baldness in laboratory rats.
Yeah, whatever.
Don't let this happen to you. Be sure to rate and subscribe.